Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 240. First, Do No Harm with Megan Farison. I will issue a little bit of a warning that this episode comes with some sensitive conversation about sexual grooming and abuse. Grooming isn't always obvious. It's a gradual process that can occur in many forms. Educators have a special responsibility to keep our spaces safe. Power imbalances in schools can create dangerous situations, and veteran music teacher and voice coach Megan Farison knows this firsthand. In this episode, she shares her deeply personal journey through the complex realities of teacher-student relationships, how grooming happens, why boundaries matter, and what educators can do to create safer environments. So stick around through this riveting episode as we discuss how grooming can occur subtly in student and teacher dynamics, why power and influence must be carefully managed in educational settings, the long-term effects of boundary violations in schools, and why open conversations about safety and ethics are critical. So tune in, and then, of course, weigh in yourself with related ideas and experiences over on the Facebook page on Choralosophers. And you can also head over to the Substack for free, choralosophy.substack.com, and comment on posts there as well. You can now find video versions of this podcast on YouTube or Spotify, as well as audio only on any podcast app. Your music program or event deserves a platform that does it all, without the extra costs. With Ludus, you get seamless ticketing, built-in marketing, powerful fundraising, and volunteer management, where volunteers can sign up, schedule shifts, and track hours with ease. Need to sell merchandise and concessions in person? Ludus Retail lets you log sales by each group, track inventory, keep everything organized. Hosting music lessons or theater camps? They have a classes feature, which makes registration and student tracking effortless. And it's free for your organization. Thousands of programs already trust Ludus because they help you focus on what matters most, the performance. I would like to encourage you to become a paid subscriber to this show. That's not required, but if you want me to keep doing it forever, I'm going to have those people subscribed. You can start at $3 a month, all the way up to $20 a month. And on Patreon, there's a list of different levels with different perks, so to speak. Or on Substack, you can simply upgrade your free subscription there to a paid subscription. The producers and inner circle at Patreon are Venture Studios, Brian Long, Angie Schilling, Danelle Eckert, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, and Steve and Kathy Kakacek. All right, everybody. I am here with Megan Farison. Megan is a veteran music teacher and voice coach, and we are going to be discussing what I will call a touchy topic today. And you heard in the episode intro that is one of the things that we do here today. So we're, I guess, living up to our name. We're going to be talking about inappropriate relationships between teachers and students and how not only we can prevent them in our own environments, but how they can sometimes manifest themselves. So Megan, thank you for being here and being vulnerable.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm really honored to be here.
Good. Well, we're going to dive into this, and but first, why don't you tell us a little bit more about you, where you come from, kind of what you do every day, and what led you to be doing it?
I grew up in Flint, Michigan, and I attended Kearsley High School, and I knew that I wanted to be a teacher as early as 8th grade, but I thought that I wanted to be an English teacher. I actually remember the moment that I thought, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I was sitting at a table next to someone and they needed help on something and said, Megan, can you explain this to me? And when I was able to do that, I saw their eyes sort of light up. It was that light bulb moment where they got it. And I thought, oh man, I want to spend the rest of my life doing this, helping people to light up. And I've just always been a helper and want people to help people reach their goals. So it was a really good fit. And then when I went into high school and I started in the band there, I had been playing in as an instrumentalist since I was 9 years old. But so I entered the high school program, and that is when I started working with my high school band director. His name is Chris Blackmer. And I quickly realized, wow, I'd always loved music. I'd always loved singing and playing. But this is when things started to sort of morph from, I think I want to teach English to, I really think I want to teach band. I really had a great relationship with my teacher. I felt good when I was in the room. I felt, I mean, maybe powerful is a way to describe it, but certainly confident. As a freshman, I ended up first chair trumpet. I went up against a senior. And so there were some things that happened that made me feel like, hey, I'm pretty good at this. And it sort of fit everything. And so sometime during my freshman year, I was like, this is what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a band director. And it wasn't until my second year in college when I sort of started going over to the dark side of choir and decided, I thought, you know what, I will always love band, but there was something that spoke to me on this deeper level. I realized that being a choir director and a voice clinician, it was something that I not only felt confident at in a unique way, but it just lit me up in a way that nothing else did. I didn't like science in high school, but you want to talk about voice science? I was here all day long for it. I was so excited. So I decided to become a choir director, and I taught in the public school system, both in schools in Michigan and Indiana for 10 years before I transitioned out of that to be a director of music and arts at Memorial Presbyterian Church here in Midland. All the while, I've been voice coaching the whole time that I've been teaching choir, which was awesome because in so many ways it showed me the way that being a voice coach and being a choir director don't always line up, and how I could use my experience as a voice teacher to help my students become the best they could individually so that we could have really great choir programs. And so I really enjoyed my time in the classroom. So now I am working from home, and I teach. I'm a voice coach for exclusively adult women, although I do coach people of any age who want individual sessions. So if someone says, I'm getting ready for an audition, great. It doesn't matter gender, age, but the people I work with every single week are adult women. So
Oh, interesting.
yeah. So that's where
Now,
I'm at
was
right
that,
now.
sorry to jump in,
No, you're good.
was that a conscious decision, or did it just work out that way that those were the clients that showed up?
Hmm. It was definitely a conscious decision before I ended up in this situation. I was teaching people of all ages. I mean, I've taught from age 8 to age 85. And I
Hmm.
do love teaching people of all ages, but through many different circumstances and me being very intentional about my life and knowing that my husband is a choir director as well, and he's busy all of the time. Of course, you know what this is like. Your life is like you're always going, and one of the parents has to have a little bit more flexibility to be able to take the kids to their appointments, right? Their dentist, their doctor's appointments, get them to their sports things. And so one of us needed a little bit more flexibility. And so teaching adult women, I work with them either in the morning or the early afternoon before my kids get out of school, because I just realized teaching after school and having evening commitments on top of trying to have dinner ready, do the laundry and all that was not very practical. So the past 5 years, especially, I've been working to make life work for our family and for me in a way that is sustainable.
Yeah. Wow. That is, yeah, and I identify with that so much. So of course, my wife is a voice teacher, but mostly teaches teenagers, which means that it's her afternoons and
Hmm.
evenings, because that's when teenagers can come,
Yep.
which leaves me teaching high school choir and being the primary ride giver for our kids because she's always working during that time.
Mm.
And so I actually have an army of kids from the school that have cars that I essentially hire as Uber drivers for my kids when I can't take them to things. So we've had to figure out all those things. So I totally get it.
Mm. Hmm.
Okay, so let's get into your story here that has kind of led you here today, which is that one of your kind of passion points or advocacy points that you find valuable to talk about because of your own personal experience is this idea of appropriate boundaries for students and teachers. And I'm assuming that in your context, you're thinking more in that classroom environment where adults are working with kids, although adult boundaries matters too. The
Yes.
colleges and universities and grad schools deal with this kind of stuff all the time too. So why don't you just jump into your story and what led you to find this topic as your advocacy uh, activism, so to speak?
So in April of 2019, I was working as the director of music and arts at this church that I had mentioned earlier. And it was a really strange day because I woke up that morning and I just something was different. I knew something felt different because most mornings I would wake up and I would have this to-do list running through my head. It'd be like, oh, I've got to do this. I got to get this ready. I've got to get the boys' lunches packed. I've got to blah, blah, blah. And I woke up that morning and it was this beautiful spring morning. The sun was shining into the room in a way that it was just like beautiful and peaceful. And all of those anxieties that I normally felt in the morning were just gone. There was nothing. And I laid there that morning, and my first conscious thought was, today is going to be a great day. And so I went into work and I'm getting a lot done, feeling really great. And my husband calls me and says, can I stop by to see you? And I'm thinking, oh, he traveled between many different buildings because he was running the high school program, the middle school program, and teaching multiple elementary buildings. So he was between buildings, and I thought, well, maybe he just misses me. And great, awesome. So he comes into my office, and I could tell something was wrong. And so I thought somebody had died. I mean, right away, I was like, oh my gosh, the boys are okay? What is happening? And he said to me, I wanted us to be together when you saw this. And when he says this, I notice he's clutching his phone to his chest. And I'm like, what is going on? And he turns his phone around and he taps on the screen and he shows me. And I'm looking at a picture of my high school band director, but it's a mugshot. And it was like my body, it was like everything left my body. The whole world stopped. And then when I came back to my senses, it was the weirdest thing because all I could think was, oh, my husband's upset. Oh, I have to comfort him. I mean, I wasn't even thinking about the mugshot thing anymore. All I was thinking was like, oh, it's okay, honey. This doesn't affect us at all. And he's like, you need to read the article. And I sat down and I started reading, and this unraveling happened inside of me. And I started convulsing and crying. And I mean, it was horrible. I mean, it was a full-on traumatic episode. And I could not make sense of what I was looking at because this man had successfully groomed me when I was young, and then began a sexual relationship with me shortly after I turned 16. And this relationship lasted for 6 years. So until I turned 22 years old. So throughout the course of my childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, that whole time I had this perception of who this man was, what this relationship was. And even when it ended and I moved on with my life, that was ingrained in me because that's how my brain was wired in that developmental stage. And so I went on with my life, never even realizing what the truth of this was. And so when I found this out on that day that he had been arrested, and he was arrested in Florida, even though I live in Michigan, he had taught here for about 20 years. And then he moved down to Florida and then taught there for 6 before he was arrested. And so what ended up happening was I had to figure out, I didn't feel like the same person. I mean, my whole life just turned upside down. Reality did not make sense to me anymore. And and I had to figure out what is true. How do I get my life back? Because I didn't feel like the same person. It was like my joy was sucked out of me in an instant. And so the book that I wrote, and I know we haven't talked about this yet, but really was my trying to put these pieces together so that I could figure out a way to make sense and process this trauma. So this really just opened up a whole world of things I had never thought about. I mean, when I was young and this relationship was happening, I thought to myself that I was one of the only people that had ever experienced this. And now, as an adult, as someone who's almost 40 years old and has been and knows more about this, I am far from the only person. There are many, and this happens to both men and women, but it's primarily women. And there are so many women around my age who are coming to terms with these relationships that they had had with their teachers when they were younger. And so there's this world that I just was not aware of until it impacted me directly. Um, and I just had no idea. So yeah, that's the start of it, basically.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So, my first question, my first thought when you're telling your story is that well, let me phrase it this way. What was the the thing that the scales fell from your eyes? You said you had this perception of what this relationship was at the time, and then you see that this person is doing this to other people, etc. What was it that you realized exactly about what the relation? Like, in other words, what did you think the relationship was versus what did you learn later that it really was? How would you characterize that? Are you a director new to the profession? Or are you a seasoned director who is in a new place? One of my favorite tips for generating interest in the program and to instill buy-in is to plan a trip. There are so many options. You can go to Orlando, you can go to Ireland, or you can perform in a parade or a theme park. You can even take the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York. Wherever you end up, not only will your current crew look forward to the trip, but younger students will count the days until it's their turn to go. If you have no idea where to start, connect with Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com.
So when I was young, I knew that it wasn't, I knew that it wasn't normal, clearly. I mean, that part was obvious to me because it had to be kept secret. And I just had been sort of trained to accept that the relationship would not be typical, and he actually ended up leaving before he started the physical relationship with me. He actually left Kersley and went to a different job. So he basically, his time was done at Kersley. And then I was actually in the band room office at Kersley the first time that he actually initiated physical contact with me. And so he ended up leaving. And so then this thing started where we would see each other every few months or whenever. And this went on for years and years. It was like an endless first date, basically. And
Mm-hmm.
so I had just accepted, like, okay, this is not a traditional relationship, but this man really cares about me. And clearly he, because this has been going on for such a long time, and because I'm a child, because I'm reasoning like a child, and because I had been manipulated by this man to trust him and to not be able to see him clearly, I just accepted these things as being reality. And I trusted, because also as a child, there's this messaging about what love is and what love looks like. And in my mind, the way this man acted with me, I thought, how could he act this way with me and not be in love with me and not care about me? Because I'm a genuine feeling person. I would never manipulate somebody else. So the interactions we're having with each other, they're genuine on my end. I genuinely care about this person. And because of their power, because of the power that they held when they were my teacher, there's even a more intense relationship there, an intense bond, because this person is not only my, you wouldn't call him a boyfriend because that's just not, it doesn't really fit, but he was a romantic partner, a parental figure, a friend. He, like, the different types of love. There's like the agape, like there's all these different, it's like he took hold of all of them. So
Yeah.
it I just believed him. and
Yeah.
and then so when I saw this article and I started reading about it, I still didn't believe I was a victim of abuse. I mean, I don't want it to seem like I read this and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I was abused." That's actually not what happened at all. What
Mm-hmm.
happened was I read it and saw, okay, he was arrested for doing this thing, but I wasn't. But my situation was different. He didn't abuse me. He really loved me. He really cared about me. I could not conceive that I was a victim of abuse. So I started going to therapy and I started trying to figure it out. But my body and my mind, they were in self-protective mode, basically, if that makes sense. I mean, this
Yeah.
is deep trauma we're talking about. So I could not believe, oh, you are a victim of rape. You were manipulated by this man, because it would unravel all these things that I grew up thinking, believing, not only about our relationship, but about myself, about my value. I thought that he liked me because I was smart and mature and all these things. So it was really hard for me to reframe that in, no, he didn't really like you. He used you because you were an easy target.
Right. It's almost as if the manipulation comes in the form of causing you to think that you are something special and different than all these other 16-year-old girls. You are more mature. You're grown up for your age. That's why we can have this relationship. Is that a fair characterization of kind
One-
of? Yeah.
100%.
Okay. And then another question I had too is earlier in your story, you said that prior to the relationship becoming physical, he had successfully groomed you, was the term that you used.
Hmm.
What does that mean? Can you tell us more about what that looked like when you were younger? At what age did he become your band teacher, for example?
Sure. So I met him at the end of my eighth grade year. He had actually visited the middle school to come audition the eighth graders to see which
Hmm.
band they would be placed in. And I think it's important to mention that my whole life I had been told by adults, oh, you're so mature. You're different from other kids. So this was something that not only, it was like it was already set up for him to sort of
Mm.
just, take to not buy into that, but sort of play off of, if you will, right? Is that he knew that I saw myself as being more mature. I saw myself as being special because that is what had been ingrained into me since I was a little kid.
Yeah.
My people used to say to my mom, "Oh, your daughter, she's 13 going on 30." And I thought that that was the greatest compliment. I mean, cuz I wanted to be an adult, I wanted to have like adult adventures and fall in love and all that stuff. I was in a hurry to grow up for sure. And there are reasons for that. But so back to the grooming, so grooming is uh the word in itself is not an evil word. So, grooming by definition is the practice of preparing or training someone for a particular purpose or activity. So, that could mean that an athletic coach is training their swimmer to become an Olympian. Your
Hmm.
parents are
Hmm.
training you or grooming you to become the next person to run their family business, to run the family business, right? So, in that case, grooming is not evil. But when you hear the word grooming in our society, we tend to connect it to sexual grooming, and specifically an adult grooming a child for a sexual relationship. Although I want to be very clear that grooming happens from adult to adult as well. That can happen in a place
Right.
of employment. That can happen, in friendships that end up having a power imbalance. Whenever you have a power imbalance in a relationship, grooming and abuse are possible. Sort of a breeding ground for that. Does that make
Right.
sense? What I'm saying so far?
It totally does. I would add a caveat, and if you disagree with this caveat, you're allowed to say that.
Sure.
I would say that when it's adult to child, that power imbalance it takes on different moral implications
Hmm.
than when it's adult to adult. Not to say that abuse can't happen when it's adult to adult, but it takes on a slightly different implication because in an adult to adult power imbalance, adults by and large have opportunities to walk away from that power imbalance. Kids almost never do. And that's why that power imbalance. I think that's why society and culture for many years have drawn boundaries around the difference between adult and child. And of course,
Hmm.
if you go back 1,000 years, that boundary might be 13 years old. But we've always had a boundary. Like like almost every society on the planet has some kind of a rite of passage where a child becomes an adult, because of that. It's the power to guide your own life. And when you're a child and you're stuck in for example, a public school setting where you have a teacher who is a predator in some way, the child can't decide to just pick up and move and go to another school. And oftentimes they are then forced to be the one that does the reporting, et cetera. How do you feel about that characterization? Am I crazy?
No, no, I would completely agree with your assessment of that. And again, I mean, the word grooming wasn't even in my world. So now it's something that I consider not only in the environment of, classrooms and teachers and students, but now when I look at relationships anywhere, I look at power imbalance and I think about how it affects relationships. And I look at how do we develop healthy relationships as opposed to when people get taken advantage of. And so that's just the way I walk through the world now, for better or
Mm-hmm.
for worse. I walk through the world and I want to have relationships where if someone is in a position of power, I want to be near the people that honor that power and responsibility by caring for the people that are in a position of less power than them. I do not trust people who abuse their power or use their power to exploit other people. So whether that's adult to adult or adult to a child, that's just how I sort of walk through the world going, okay, you're a safe person. You're not a safe person. And it's all about how people use their power and influence. And power imbalances can occur because of age difference, because of position, because of it can be a racial inequality thing. It could be, there's so many things that create that. So I know that's going off on a little side journey
No, that's
there.
fine.
Um, but yeah, so back to this situation and grooming as far as teacher to student and what happened to me, I would encourage your listeners. I would just say them, but I don't have them written down right in front of me. And I don't want to get them wrong, but there are stages of grooming. So I think most people think of them as 6 stages, but there is you have to gain trust. There are things that have to happen in order to sort of build up to the point where you have the um, opportunity to then assault that child,
Uh-huh.
if that is the intention.
Is that
Um,
the gain access and generate allure thing in your email? Is that what it is?
That's part of it. So
Oh, okay.
that has to do specifically with environmental grooming. So, and this is really important to talk about too, is if any of your listeners or maybe you, Chris, have been in a situation where you've worked with somebody that they do things that probably aren't acceptable, but you're like, oh, that's so and so. That's just
Mm,
how they are. So, what's happened is that a lot of these teachers will groom the environment to make unacceptable behavior become normal. They normalize behavior that should not be acceptable, like inappropriate jokes, like sexual jokes, like touching, where they're playful with the students and they sort of bump elbows and they're like almost flirtatious, right?
mm-hmm,
And this
mm-hmm.
does happen and I've seen it happen and it happens way more than anyone would probably believe. But the thing is that if it stopped early on, if someone were to say, because not all teachers that make bad decisions are predators, right? I'm sure
Sure.
that you and I have made choices where we look back and go, I really wish I would have said that differently or I would have done that differently. So good people end up making choices or just do something because they were never taught maybe you shouldn't do this because what it does is it instills something in your students that makes them start to look at you a different way. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
instead of looking at you like a teacher, they start looking at you like, like a woman or a man in a more alluring sort of way, right?
Yeah.
Which
Or
we
in a more
do.
of or in too close to a peer kind of way,
Correct, and
which can
that's
lead to that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
I don't know if you've heard about it. If you haven't heard about it, you've got to go try 3-Minute Theory. You can go to 3minutetheory.com and you can check it out now when you decide to get this comprehensive system of pre-made materials for your music theory related concepts. You just go into that account and pull out tons of ready-made material. I don't think you'll be even able to teach all of it in 1 year. It's so much stuff that you can tailor make and custom make to your needs. So go check it out. And of course, use the Choralosophy discount code when you sign up to get a 15% discount on your membership. From my early career, I share a story with like student teachers and every younger teachers that I come around where I learned a lesson in a very concrete way as a younger teacher regarding those boundaries. It wasn't a sexual situation, but it was a situation where I had a student who I just became too wrapped up in the decisions she was making about her future, to the
Mm.
point where I didn't have a good sense of the boundary even there of this is not my kid. This is someone else's kid. She's going to make decisions that are her, regarding college and what she was going to do, all this kind of stuff. And to the point where by the time she had become a senior, this is like within my first 4 or 5 years teaching, we were getting in arguments about stuff like in front of other kids, to the point where it was obvious to the other kids that relationship was not the same as everyone else's relationship in the class. And I look back on that now and I think, I just learned so much from looking back on that type of a situation, where I think it fits a lot of these markers where that environment gets created to where if a teacher's not careful, I look back on how that happened to me. It through a series of just not knowing to set up certain barriers and boundaries around those types of relationships. And I can imagine if a teacher never learns that lesson, how it could just get progressively worse and worse.
Hmm.
With those, seeing each other as peers, et cetera, especially when we're talking about high school students that are, growing up, and they in many ways can trick you into thinking that they are adults, inconsistent adults. Thoughts?
Well, first off, thank you so much for sharing that story. And I'm going to say something that I think needs to be said more, which
Mm-hmm.
is, as a teacher, you are going to come in contact with students that have attractive qualities that you may find attractive.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And that there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you for feeling that way, because you're around these students. And there are students who do come off as being very mature and they're charming and they may be physically attractive. But what you don't see is their brains. They're still children on the inside. They may know how to communicate and they know how to, and a lot of these children, though, that know how to do that, they do it because of trauma too. Some of them know how to morph themselves and protect themselves by turning into whatever they need to be safe in an
Yeah.
environment. So
Yeah.
for me, I knew that if I behaved a certain way, if I acted a certain way, I would receive attention and love from adults. And that felt good to me. So it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't that it was fake or that I was being something I wasn't, but that felt safe to me to be more like an adult. But
Right.
it didn't matter what I looked like, though, or how I acted, because my brain was not fully developed. And that is why somebody like my band director was able to get me to warp my reality in such a way where I could not see him clearly or what was happening. So, as a teacher, we most teachers know that when you compliment a student, you want to be careful how you do that. Maybe a kid comes into your room and they're wearing really cool new shoes or something. You're like, "Hey, I really like your shoes. Those shoes are cool," right? That is different then. And this happened to me. This is actually the first moment where my teacher, I look back now and I see that he had intentionally crossed a line. Is
Hmm.
that toward the end of my freshman year, I was in jazz band, which was an extracurricular group, but we were playing at an event. It was in the middle school cafeteria, actually. And I got there before everybody else. And I was wearing this dress that I had gotten on our 8th grade trip to Washington, D.C. And I can still just remember what it looked like. And I loved it. I felt great in it. And I walked in and he was setting up stands and chairs and must have heard me approaching. He turned around and he sort of like sighed into this smile, like he dropped this. He was a very like rules matter, and he was a very intense sort of man, very in control, very intense. So he that sort of like dropped and melted, and his eyes got really soft, and he said, "That dress looks really nice on you." And when he said this, my stomach, like if we remember being a teenager and like that feeling of when you'd kiss somebody or somebody would look at you that you had a crush on and your stomach would knot up, like you'd get that it's like
Yeah.
Velcro, like like that kind of feeling. It was so intense. It was like almost to the point of making me feel physically ill, but also good, because it was that feeling I had with if I had a crush on a boy who smiled at me or wherever, but this was my band director. And so
Right.
that was sort of the start. That was the first thing that I remember intentionally was like that. But there were other things. I mean, isolation is another tactic where you start to isolate your target. Once you selecting the target is a step. They sort of figure out, and it's very intentional, who is vulnerable in the group, who becomes the target. And so there was a time when my boyfriend, my on again, off again boyfriend in high school, had upset me at a band camp in the summertime. And I left the room and I went to a stairwell and I was upset. And my band director came into this stairwell while I was sitting there on the steps crying. And here I am thinking, oh my gosh, this man cares about me, right? He went out of his way. He noticed I left. He was watching. He noticed I left and he walked into the staircase and he said, "Are you okay?" In this very warm, genuine tone. And I said, "Yeah, like I'll be fine." And then he said, "Boys are stupid." And this is that messaging. This is where you start to cross the line between a teacher who legitimately cares for a student and they're checking on them because, again, we have been there. We've seen a student is upset or whatever, and we go to that student and say, "Are you okay?" But this man went another step further, and he said, "Boys are stupid. If you think it would help, I'd be willing to give him some advice." So
He, like, in other words, he was offering advice to this boy that you were talking to.
he was offering to me that he would go talk to my boyfriend about how to treat me.
Yikes. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's this messaging that happens, but on such a level that maybe if another adult were standing there, they might go, "That was a little weird," but there was no other adult there in the room. He did that with just the two of us.
Hmm.
And then we were sitting on a bus together on the way home from an event, a Blast, if people know what Blast is, like band directors, and there was behavior where we were sitting next to each other where he would find ways to elbow me or I'd make him laugh, and so he'd find ways to touch me. And so again, these barriers would start to come down little by little by little until one day I was like, "Oh my gosh, like I feel like I'm in love with my band director. How did I let this happen?" I start blaming myself for it. And I'm
Right.
like, what is going on? And now I can't function at school. Instead of showing up to school and just being myself, I'm always conscious of where this man is in the room, how other students are treating me because they were teasing me. "Oh, Mr. Blackmer likes you. It's so clear Mr. Blackmer likes you." And they don't understand either that this is a dangerous situation. They're like,
Hmm.
there's jealousy going on. Which again, if not even sexual stuff, but if we're talking about teachers that show favoritism to
Right.
students, you're
Yep.
creating conflict in the classroom
Yep.
between that is, you always have to ask yourself, you have to come back to this question again and again if you want to be a safe teacher. The decisions I'm making, am I making them for my students or am I making them for myself? And
Yeah.
that is where the line gets crossed with grooming too, is am I grooming my child to be independent for them? Or am I grooming my child to be the things I want them to be?
Yeah.
Because that's what I want. And so, I'd say that again, if people want to read the whole story, they can, but I think that sort of gives you some some insight into how it started, maybe looked a little bit innocent, less innocent, less innocent, until he's inviting me to his apartment for lunch, until he's, it just keeps getting, it's boundary pushing is what you're doing. You're seeing what boundaries you can get away with. And
Right.
then once you get comfortable enough and know, oh, I can get away with this, then the door is open for you to then, for the assault to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that's incredible. And I think, and I wonder too, if when, when teachers allow themselves, kind of thinking about this from his perspective, um, in other, like, what is he telling himself this whole time? In
Mm-hmm.
other words, how is he rationalizing it to himself that it's okay the whole time? And I wonder if it's not all that dissimilar, meaning, well, it's just one little elbow nudge. Well, it's just one little, oh, I'm just offering to help with the boyfriend, that kind of stuff. And then those feelings grow mutually, to the point where, I guess what I'm asking is to get your sense of whether or not you think this is a thing where he, from the very first moment he meets a kid, he is on, like, thinking, I am going to groom this child for sexual abuse, or do you think he tells himself a story that makes him not the bad guy?
This is a really good question. With him, I absolutely believe he knew what he was doing. I
Okay.
think that um, there are, that's what makes this complicated, right? Is that you have these people, and we mentioned this earlier, that they end up getting themselves into situations and they go, like you were talking about when you were a younger, teacher, and you were having this like back and forth and thinking, oh my gosh, the difference between you and this man is that you thought about it. You actually reflected on this and you said to yourself, wait, something isn't right. He leaned into it. And so
Hmm.
what the research says, and I want to mention the book Duck, Duck, Groom, How a Child Becomes a Target, by Anna Sonoda. I would recommend any educator, any parent, anyone that's around children to read that, because number one, it's very pragmatic and it's very assuring. It says we can stop children from being abused. And here's how you do it. You can see these behaviors. They are observable. It's sort of like when someone says, am I a narcissist? It's like, well, if you've even thought the question, am I a narcissist? You're probably not a narcissist. because you're reflecting, you're self-reflecting on what is this doing to that student and what is it doing to me? He did not
Right.
care. He did not. And so these are very intentional things. When people abuse children, it is intentional. They target them. And as far as these other situations, these outlying situations, because we don't have any research on people like genuinely good people who end up abusing children. you know, like
Right. Sure. Yeah.
when you, when you put it that way, it's sort of like, okay, but what I will say is if we care about both our teachers and our student, both of them, we would stop the behavior early on. I'm thinking about a man that was called out just this past, oh goodness, I don't even know if it's been a year now, but a student went to Facebook, a former student who is now a full-on adult, and she told her story on the internet because nobody had helped her. And as an adult, she felt like this is the only place I have a voice now. And she came out with her story and said how this man had raped not only her, but these other girls. And he had made it all the way up to being a band director at a university. The
Hmm.
next day, this man shot and killed himself.
Wow.
Now, however, I guess what I would say, I would ask the question, how could this have been different if at the start of when this man started showing signs that he was a predator, could we have prevented this tragedy? And I know that people say, well, it wasn't a tragedy because he was a rapist. But the thing is like, if we care about people, we don't know what's going on in their head exactly, or who's the bad guy from the start and whatever. That's not our job. Our job is to hold people accountable. when they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing. And this man had a reputation for decades of being abusive, not sexually, but like yelling at students, throwing stands, acting like a child, and no one was stopping him. And so
Yeah.
then he racks up all these victims so that when something finally comes out and the victim who should never have been in the position to be the one to out him, finally does it, he feels like my only option is I don't want to live in this world anymore.
Yeah. Wow.
If we care about our teachers, we will hold them accountable before this gets bad, because maybe it is a young teacher who just doesn't know any better. I mean, you were fortunate that you realized when you were going down a path like, oh, this isn't what I want. Not everybody has those resources. And so it's our
Right.
responsibility to train people, and it has to be a team effort. The school, the teachers, the students, the community, we have to come together and say safety is important. Kids, they can't learn if they don't feel safe. And not only just physically, but we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah, their needs have to be, in order for them to learn, they have to be fed and have oxygen in their lungs and all that stuff. But safety, mental safety, emotional safety. Have you ever walked into a place where you thought, I have no idea what's going to happen in this room, and you didn't feel safe because so and so, some days they're nice, some days they're mean, some days you have no idea what you're walking into. Now
Mm-hmm.
imagine being a student walking into a classroom and wondering what their teacher's going to be like that day. That is not fair. So while we're human and while we're going to have bad days, we have a responsibility to create stability for our students. And mental safety, emotional safety, them knowing what to expect is so important in all of that. And it's so interconnected, all of it. You see how it's this web of all these things, but it starts with the intention, right? Of saying, I want to be a safe teacher. I want my students to feel safe in the classroom.
Right. Yeah. One of my, I guess you could say one of my prouder moments was a former student who is now an adult and in her mid to late 20s and has a family, and was coming through town and came by to see me. And one of the things that came up in conversation was that she actually was unsolicited. Said that one of the things I really appreciated about you when I was your student is that I always felt safe, and I always felt like you were not one of those creeper teachers. And um and I went, okay, well, first of all,
Mm,
thank you. But second of all, what do you mean those creeper teachers? And
mm,
she proceeded to tell me that it was relatively common in her experience for her to feel a little bit weirded out by the flirtatious way that some male teachers would talk to her about or talk with her with. And my first thought was like, okay, so yes, I feel proud of that comment, but at the same time, I'm kind of horrified that I stood out to you in some way.
right?
like
You were
so
the
and
outlier.
right, and we talked a little bit more about it, and she said it wasn't like every teacher, of course, but it was a common enough for her that she noticed that didn't seem to feel that way for me. And earlier you were talking about my other story too. And I've shared this on the show before on the episode when Scott Barry Kaufman was on the show, a psychologist. And part of my way of looking at this is shaped by some trauma that I experienced as a kid too. And one of those was basically the short version of that story is that I witnessed the direct aftermath of my mother's sexual assault when I was
Mm,
13 years old, and grew up the rest of my young teenage life and young adult male life blaming myself for not protecting her.
mm,
And of course, I know now through therapy sessions and whatnot that if there was nothing I could have done, it wasn't my job to protect her in that sense. But as a guy, we get taught that's our reason to exist, is to protect.
mm,
And I failed to protect her in that situation. And so, in a lot of ways, as a teacher, some of that negative baggage has become a positive way that I look at kids. because you're right that we said this earlier, and I thought this was really insightful that you said that, a teacher isn't supposed to like not notice the difference between pretty people and not pretty people. And like, that's not a natural thing to do. But at the same time, we have to recognize that our job is, in some ways, as teachers, our job is protective. We are
Hmm.
trying to create an environment of safety so that kids can learn. And I think one of the things that I've learned from my experience was that everyone is capable of bad stuff. And so one of
Hmm.
the ways we protect ourselves from not being one of the people that does the bad stuff is by acknowledging that we're all capable of it. So let's set up some guardrails. Let's
Hmm.
set up some, because I think what sometimes happens is the person who tells themselves that I'm not even capable of such a thing, then they're the ones that are more likely to rationalize their behavior and do bad stuff. Thoughts?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and you had mentioned the safety thing about. I'm so glad you came back to the first off, I'm so sorry that happened to your mother.
Hmm.
And I'm grateful that you were able through that pain to take that and then use it to be a safe person for your
Hmm.
students, because not everybody has the tools to do that. So I think that, you
I had a
took
lot of
this.
support, which
That's
I was lucky. Yeah.
right. I mean, because
Hmm.
that's the thing is some of these students, they are vulnerable because they don't have support, because nobody is
Hmm.
watching. And the way that we interact with our students sets the tone for what they expect from other people later in their life who are in positions of authority over them. So
Hmm.
in my case, men in positions of authority, I had an idea for what that looked like or what was acceptable, when the line should have been way the heck over here, right? Like, oh, you should never do this. You should never do this. And also, there's being a female, being a woman, we also have messaging from society about how our job is to care for others and make other people feel comfortable. And I want to
Hmm.
make sure that you feel okay. So I may be willing to be uncomfortable just because I don't want to make you feel bad. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. So we also have to work through those societal things as well in
Yeah.
just teaching people how to set boundaries. So it is so important. And our job again is, if you see a student, right, that is attractive or you have an energy with, your job as the adult is to turn away from that, is to practice saying, but this is a child. And even at the college level, because grooming and sexual assault is very prevalent at the college level. I mean, once you hit the age of consent, which is one of the reasons why this is so rampant, is that that is used as an excuse, even by law, to say, well, but they reached the age of consent. So you get college students and professors together, and now you're in this more gray area, but
Yep.
they're still in a position of power over this other person, and there's exploitation involved or potential. There are situations where a grad student and an undergrad fall in love with each other. Well, then guess what you do? You should report that relationship to the school because it's legitimate. When there's nothing expected of that, then the younger person may think they're in a legitimate relationship, but really they're being exploited and used. So even just putting systems of accountability into place to say, okay, fine, you're a grad student, you want to date this undergrad, if this is even the case. I know some schools say that's not allowed at all, right? But
Oh, wow.
if it is allowed, well, then you should report it. There should be transparency. That's transparency is huge. There should be nothing we ever have to hide from anyone.
Yeah.
And I want to give a shout out to the Elephant Alliance. They are an organization. They travel the country and give presentations with their main goal of preventing educator sexual misconduct. And that doesn't even have to be physical abuse. That's a whole range of inappropriate jokes and flirtation all the way to assault, rape. But they
Yeah.
travel the country, and I'm friends with them, and they provided a lot of their research. They graciously gave me their stuff because I have my personal experience, but then I also have gone out and done research about, how does this affect not just me, but everybody else.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
Well, and one thing I wanted to add too, with that teacher, with the teacher student part, is to me the solution to a lot of these things is relatively simple. Of course, nothing is simple in practice, but just simple in concept, which is that we teach or we treat all of our kids the same, whether they're the pretty kid or not the pretty kid.
Mm,
That we treat them the same. In other words, if it's a behavior that's appropriate, if it's a boundary that is healthy, then it would apply to all kids. I hate the fact that we live in a world where a kid that is crying at school, we have teachers that are afraid to give that kid a hug. I
mm,
like I
mhm,
I I hate that, but that is the reality of the world that we live in. And another one that happened to me not even all that long ago, where I have a kid who I know, I'm 100% sure, this kid does not get the reinforcement at home and the affection at home that they need. And the student started coming to my class every day wanting a hug.
mm,
And I hate that we live in a world where I can't do that, because I know my intentions towards the student. But first time I thought, well, maybe this kid is like just really sad today. And I gave the hug.
mhm,
But the second time, it was the next day, same thing. I had to pull this person aside, and I had to say, from now on, we'll do fist bumps. And
mhm,
I was just really honest with the kid. I said, I hate that hugs are that way, like that. But I can't. This is not an appropriate thing for us to do in class every day. And so if you're really sad, of course, and you want to come and talk to me, you can come and talk to me. But today, let's switch to moving to fist bumps. And the student, this is like a 17-year-old kid, was totally smart enough to get that.
mhm,
Like right. But again, it's just these things, because of the stories like yours, we do live in that world. We do live in a world where teachers have to build those boundaries that don't always feel natural. They don't always feel empathetic. But we also have to realize that we're teaching a diverse background of people that all are going to respond to those boundaries differently. I'll give you the final word, and I also want you to talk to us a little bit about this book that you wrote about this, and where we can get it, and kind of why you decided to write it.
mm. Um, thank you. And I just wish what you just said about the way you handled this with this child, that you didn't just try to avoid it. You said, basically, you showed this, you still cared about them, and you're
Mm-hmm.
still providing physical touch to them, which it is important. And I would never
Mm-hmm.
tell a teacher, don't ever hug your students. Like I've
Mm-hmm.
hugged my students, but it's about intention, and is it
Yep.
reasonable? And even without my story, if you hugged that one kid every day, the other kids would be like, well, where's my hug? Like,
Exactly.
it creates
Yes.
the favoritism, right?
Yep.
So it's
Mm-hmm.
like I just love the way you handled that. And wow, if you just if in every school we just had one conversation even about this. I mean, in with most schools we have active shooter drills now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we don't spend any time talking about healthy boundaries between teachers and students. I never sat through one professional development about that. I didn't have one class about ethics, even though we care for developing minds, we care for humans. So I'm just really, really thankful you shared that. Now, so the book, um, I started writing the book in 2021, in March of 2021. And I started writing it because it was either I need to write this book, I need to figure things out, or I'm going to lose everything. Like my
Mm-hmm.
life, I was
Mm-hmm.
in complete crisis at that point. And so the writing helped me to process and put pieces together. I think of it as like sitting on the floor in front of thousands of puzzle pieces, and they're all little moments in your life. And your job is to start to fit them together and see how do they all fit together. And you don't even know what the large picture is going to look like, but you know that every time you find a piece that fits, you there's something that lights up in you that goes, okay, I get that. Because you have to like logic your way out of what's been trained into you until your body can actually feel it. And the book is called Dissonance, because I wanted to find a word that had both a meaning in psychology and music. And so I actually want to credit my husband for coming up with this, because he knew I was trying to find this word. And one day he was like, I know what you're going to call your book. You're going to call it Dissonance. And I was like, you are a genius.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's great.
It is,
Yeah.
it really, really fits. And so, the book, it is a dual timeline memoir. So we alternate between present and past. So you see how these pieces fit together, how what happened in the past has a significant and profound effect on what is happening in the future. And so my message to people would be, this does matter. It is important because the potential consequences of not doing the uncomfortable thing, of not setting the boundaries, of not creating systems where people are held accountable, and just even be willing to talk about this, you're affecting not only that person, that potential target, that potential victim, you are potentially spreading that pain to their family, to their friends. So that trauma doesn't only affect, just like you, when your mom was assaulted, that didn't affect only her. That affected you. I'm sure that
Mm-hmm.
affected your father. That affected her family. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's so important that we make that a priority. And the more we talk about it, the less taboo it becomes. I think I said to you in an email, like, we should make it like, don't touch the stove. Look both ways before crossing the street. Here's how you recognize predatory behavior in people, and here's how we deal with it before it gets to the point that you're like, oh my God, if I say something, this teacher's going to get fired. And that is not the place we should get to. We should
Right.
make it where we notice these behaviors, we try to correct them early on, and then that gives the teacher a chance. We get a chance to see, is this one of the good guys, that's just, they're learning? Because I
Mm-hmm.
know that there were times I was young and maybe, hey, Megan, think about how you said this. Oh, okay. Or are they somebody that's going to ignore what you just said? Are you going to say to them, you shouldn't be doing this and this is why? And they go, okay, to your face. And then they go and continue to do it because they should not be in the classroom.
And learn how to hide it better.
And
That
they
that
learn.
right.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So you can get the book on Amazon, but if you don't want to shop on Amazon for whatever personal reasons you have, you can find it on barnesandnoble.com. I mean, if you look up Dissonance, a Memoir by Megan Farison, you're going to find that it's available on lots of different websites to buy. And if you read it, if you want to share a message with me, you can find me on social media. I have a website, meganfarison.com. I'm just trying to find ways to be available to people if they want to talk about these things, because that's really where this starts, is with intention and discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very well said. Well, Megan, and I'll make sure we grab a link and put it in the show notes as well, so people can find it directly with the episode.
I would love to offer too to your listeners, if when you put in links, I'll go ahead and offer a preview of the book for free so that they can see if it's something that they want to read. Is that possible to do?
Absolutely. Whatever you send me, I can put in the show notes. One of the
Awesome.
benefits of hosting my own show on my own website, it makes it very flexible.
Thank you. Well,
All
this
right.
has
Well,
been,
Megan,
thank you so much.
yeah, thank you for being here with me. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one at Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code. And of course, now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.